Did you see what really happened on New Year's Eve? I'm not asking about the curated images of confetti cannons firing in Times Square or the hollow promises of politicians broadcast on every channel. I'm talking about the crime that took place in the silent, cold data streams of the global markets, the digital battlefield where your future is won or 22 lost. While you were raising a glass, distracted by fireworks and the comforting illusion of a fresh start, they executed a financial heist of such breathtaking audacity that it redefines the very meaning of corruption. They used the deafening noise of global celebration as the perfect cover, a planetary-scale diversion to perform a desperate act of life support on a system that had already flatlined. This wasn't a minor market correction or a case of nervous traders. This was a coordinated, violent intervention designed to conceal a catastrophic truth, that one of the largest financial institutions on Earth, a name you know and are taught to trust, was technically bankrupt. It was a walking corpse, mere hours away from triggering a chain reaction that would have vaporized markets worldwide. They knew it, and so they committed a crime in plain sight, a brutal manipulation followed by a secret bailout, all while you were being sold a fairy tale about a prosperous new year. They counted on your distraction. They bet on your ignorance. That bet is about to cost them everything, because I am going to show you the receipt. But before I pull back the curtain and show you the irrefutable proof, I need you to do something critical. Hit the like button. I'm not asking for my ego. I'm asking you to join the fight against censorship. The algorithms that control the flow of information are designed to bury truths like this, to keep you in the dark. Pushing that button tells the machine that this is a conversation that needs to be had, that the truth matters. It's our primary weapon to ensure this message breaks through their wall of silence and reaches the people who need to hear it most. Do it now, because what I'm about to reveal is something they will desperately try to suppress. Let's go to the scene of the crime. December 31st, 2025. The exact time was 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a moment deliberately chosen for its strategic value. The European markets were closed, deep in their holiday slumber. The Asian markets had not yet woken up to the new day. In America, Wall Street was a ghost town with only skeleton crews manning the desks, their minds already on champagne and the coming festivities. It was the perfect operational window, maximum liquidity drain, and minimum human oversight. The mainstream financial media, the so-called watchdogs of the system, were completely neutered, running prepackaged year-in-review segments filled with fluff and meaningless predictions. This was the moment they chose to act under the cloak of global apathy. They needed this precise moment of manufactured calm to perform the most violent surgery on the market's central nervous system. It was in this engineered quiet, this pre-planned vacuum of attention, that two events occurred. Events that, according to their own models and the laws of statistical probability, should be utterly impossible. Two lightning strikes hitting the exact same spot at the exact same millisecond. But this was no act of nature. This was the deliberate, synchronized execution of a conspiracy. The first lightning strike hit the silver market. For months, silver had been on a historic, unstoppable run, a global movement of physical accumulation that the banks could not contain. It had broken through every technical resistance level, fueled by a growing public realization that the paper currency system was a house of cards. It soared past the old high of $50, then charged through $70, and on that final day of the year, it was knocking on the door of $83 an ounce, a price that represented an existential threat to the over-leveraged paper short positions held by the banking cartel. Then, at precisely 9:30 p.m., the floor vanished. In a matter of minutes, the price was vertically crushed in a way that defies all market logic. This wasn't a gradual sell-off or a healthy correction. It was a 5% collapse, straight down to $71, a move of such violence and precision it looked like a controlled demolition. Billions of dollars in value were erased in the blink of an eye, not because of a change in fundamental supply and demand, but because an entity with a gun to its head dumped an unprecedented volume of paper contracts onto the market with the sole intention of triggering a panic cascade. It was a desperate, scorched earth tactic to force a specific price outcome, regardless of the collateral damage. And here is the second lightning strike, the piece of evidence that turned suspicion into certainty. At the exact same moment that silver was being surgically taken down, a critical alert flashed across the Federal Reserve's public data logs. A sudden, massive, and entirely unannounced injection of $31 billion materialized in the overnight repurchase market, or repo market. Let me be perfectly clear about what this means. The repo market is the pawn shop for the big banks. It's where they go for emergency, short-term loans when they are desperately short on cash. An injection of this magnitude is not routine year-end plumbing, as the financial apologists will claim. To put $31 billion into perspective, it is the single largest emergency liquidity operation the Fed has conducted since the absolute darkest days of the March 2020 COVID panic, a time when the entire global economy was thought to be on the verge of total collapse. This was not a routine operation. This was the financial equivalent of deploying a medical crash cart and defibrillators to a patient in cardiac arrest. It was a secret, undeclared bailout, a massive infusion of freshly printed money aimed at a very specific and hidden point of failure within the system. The media, when they bother to mention these events at all, will feed you a carefully crafted and insulting lie. They will tell you that the silver crash was simply year-end profit-taking by investors who wanted to lock in their gains. They will describe the Fed's $31 billion injection as routine market plumbing to ensure there was enough liquidity over the holiday period. They expect you to believe that these two monumental crisis-level events happening in the very same minute are a complete and total coincidence. It is an insult to your intelligence. This is not a coincidence, it is cause and effect. It is the blueprint of the crime. You do not see a massive fire and a man running away with an empty gasoline can and conclude the two are unrelated. The violent takedown in the silver market created a catastrophic liquidity crisis for the institution that orchestrated it, and the Federal Reserve, the supposed impartial regulator, was waiting in the wings to provide the getaway car in the form of a $31 billion cash infusion. They are not separate stories. They are two halves of the same criminal conspiracy, an act of market manipulation followed immediately by a taxpayer-funded cover-up. And it is right here at the intersection of these two impossible events that the story gets truly dark. Because what I am about to show you is not a speculative theory or a wild guess. I have the receipts. I am going to walk you through the crime scene step by step and reveal the identity of the too-big-to-fail institution that was on the brink of death. That $31 billion is not just a data point, it is the smoking gun. It is the irrefutable proof that one of the pillars of the global financial system was functionally insolvent just hours before the ball dropped in Times Square, and the people in charge chose to commit a felony to hide it from you. They were counting on you never discovering the math behind their deception, and that is exactly what we are going to break down next. Now let's connect the dots, let's look at the numbers and the mechanics that they pray you never understand. The official story they fed the compliant media was year-end profit-taking. It is an insultingly simple lie designed for a public they believe is too lazy to question it. Let me explain what the transaction logs actually show. Profit-taking is a slow bleed. It's a gradual, distributed process as thousands of individual investors decide to cash in their chips over hours or days. What we saw on December 31st was the opposite of that. It was a single, monolithic, crushing wave of selling pressure that appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. The volume signature shows a vertical spike, an impossible concentration of sell orders executed in a microsecond window, followed by an eerie silence the moment the price hit exactly $71. This wasn't the behavior of a diverse market. It was the calculated, targeted strike of a single, desperate entity with a gun to its own head. So who was this desperate entity? What really happened? For years, one of the largest, most powerful banking institutions on the planet, a name you are taught to trust, a pillar of the system, has been playing a very dangerous game. They were massively short silver. Let me translate that from their jargon into plain English. They made a multi-billion-dollar bet that the price of silver would collapse. They sold paper contracts for metal they did not own and did not have, confident they could buy them back later at a lower price and pocket the difference. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They failed to account for you. For the millions of people around the world who realized the paper currency game was rigged and began demanding real physical metal, they bet against reality, and reality was about to cash them out. Throughout the final quarter of 2025, their position went from problematic to catastrophic. As the global movement for physical silver gained unstoppable momentum, the price didn't just rise, it exploded. It blew past the old psychological barrier of $50 an ounce, then accelerated through $70. As it charged towards $83 an ounce on that final day of the year, the paper losses on this bank's books were no longer measured in the single billions. We are talking about a loss so profound, so existentially threatening that it was on the verge of wiping out their entire capital base. At $83 an ounce, this too-big-to-fail institution was, for all intents and purposes, technically bankrupt. It was a walking corpse, and the clock was ticking towards midnight. And here is the mechanism they desperately want to hide from you. That ticking clock wasn't just symbolic. Midnight on December 31st is the most critical moment of the entire fiscal year for these banks. It is the instant when regulators take a mandatory, legally binding snapshot of every institution's balance sheet to determine if they are solvent. It is the final exam, and there is no cheating. If that snapshot showed the catastrophic multi-billion-dollar loss from their silver short, the bank would have instantly failed its capital requirements. The regulators would have no choice but to declare it insolvent on the morning of January 1st, triggering a chain reaction that would have made Lehman Brothers in 2008 look like a minor tremor. The entire system was hours away from cardiac arrest. This is where the conspiracy shifts from a bad bet into an active, premeditated crime. They couldn't make the tens of billions in losses magically disappear from their books. The hole was too deep, so they resorted to a dirty, illegal industry trick known as window dressing. Since they couldn't fix the loss, their only other option was to violently and artificially manipulate the price of the asset itself, just for a few hours. Their goal was simple and sinister: force the price of silver down on the screen long enough to survive that midnight regulatory snapshot. It is an act of pure, unadulterated fraud designed to present a completely false picture of financial health to the very regulators meant to be policing them. Let me give you a simple metaphor so you understand the sheer criminality of this act. Imagine an inspector is scheduled to visit your house in 1 hour to assess its value, but there is a massive stinking pile of garbage in the middle of your living room. You don't have time to take it to the dump. What do? You frantically shove all of it into the nearest closet, spray some air freshener, and slam the door shut just as the doorbell rings. For the brief moment the inspector is walking through, the room looks clean. The problem hasn't been solved, it has just been hidden behind a flimsy door. This is exactly what they did. That mountain of garbage was their multi-billion-dollar loss, and the controlled demolition of the silver price was them slamming the closet door shut. That vertical crash from $83 down to $71 wasn't a market event. It was the sound of that closet door slamming. By dumping an unprecedented volume of paper contracts onto the market in a pre-holiday liquidity vacuum, they triggered a cascade of automated selling, achieving their target price with surgical precision. By doing this, they were able to mark their disastrous short position against the new fake price of $71, artificially and fraudulently reducing their on-paper losses to a level that was just barely passable for the midnight inspection. They survived. They passed the test. The inspector walked away none the wiser, believing the house was clean. But that violent act of manipulation, that desperate shoving of garbage into the closet, created an immediate and equally severe secondary crisis, a massive liquidity black hole. To execute a market slam of that magnitude requires billions upon billions of dollars in immediate cash to settle the trades and cover their tracks. It's the cost of the crime. They had just proven they were functionally bankrupt, so where did that emergency cash infusion come from? Who was their accomplice waiting outside with the getaway car? This is the question that exposes the entire conspiracy. Now look back at the second lightning strike. At the exact same minute as the silver takedown, the Federal Reserve's own data shows a sudden, unannounced injection of $31 billion into the overnight repo market. These numbers are not a coincidence. They are a receipt. The Federal Reserve, run by the systemic elites who are supposed to be the impartial referees of the system, was the accomplice. They saw their favored institution about to implode and rode to the rescue. That $31 billion was not routine plumbing. It was the emergency bailout cash, the hush money, funneled directly to the perpetrator to help them cover up the crime and survive the night. It was a silent taxpayer-guaranteed rescue for a single insolvent criminal institution. They passed their inspection, and the champagne corks popped in their boardrooms. They believed they had contained the crisis and that you, the public, would be none the wiser, distracted by the New Year's celebrations. They thought they had successfully shoved the problem into the closet where it could be dealt with quietly in the new year. But what they failed to understand in their arrogance is that the force required to slam that door shut has fractured the very foundations of the market itself. They didn't solve the problem, they just guaranteed that the entire structure will now collapse, and the evidence they left behind is undeniable. But this isn't where the story ends. This is where it gets truly dark, because the events of New Year's Eve were not just a desperate one-off bailout to save a single reckless bank. That was merely the trigger, the symptom of a much deeper disease. What you witnessed was the panicked, coordinated activation of a global financial defense protocol, an act of war against reality itself. The systemic elites didn't just save one of their own, they executed a pre-planned contingency to defend the most critical pillar of their power, the integrity of the entire paper-based financial system. They understood that an uncontrolled, physically driven silver price above $80, and certainly above $100, would not just bankrupt one institution. It would serve as a global announcement that the emperor has no clothes, proving definitively that the price of real assets is no longer determined by supply and demand, but is a politically managed number. The $31 billion injection wasn't just a bailout, it was a declaration that the state will use unlimited, newly printed currency to enforce a fraudulent price forever. What happens when the price on a screen becomes a complete and total fiction? While their computers in New York and London were painting a fraudulent price of $71 an ounce onto the global ticker, a very different reality was unfolding on the ground. I have the reports. My contacts in the physical bullion markets from Zurich to Singapore confirmed it with chilling uniformity. At the exact moment the screen price was crashing, the real-world price for physical delivery exploded. You could not get your hands on a 1,000-ounce silver bar for less than $100 an ounce. In high-demand retail markets across Asia, premiums pushed the all-in cost to over $130. This is the single most important piece of evidence you will ever see. It is the final deafening siren. A price is not a real price if you cannot transact at that price. It means the paper market, the COMEX, the entire apparatus of Western finance has been completely disconnected from physical reality. It is now nothing more than a propaganda tool, a digital fiction maintained by the force of the central bank's printing press to prevent a mass psychological break from their failing system. This isn't some new, sophisticated tactic. We have seen this exact script play out before, and it always ends in catastrophe. Do you remember 2008? In the months leading up to the collapse, Federal Reserve officials and Wall Street CEOs stood before Congress and the American people, looked directly into the camera, and swore on their reputations that the subprime mortgage crisis was contained. They told us Bear Stearns was a unique situation and that Lehman Brothers had a strong capital position right up until the moment both firms ceased to exist, vaporizing trillions in global wealth. This is the same playbook, executed with the same arrogance. They are lying to you about the health of the system, lying about the true price of real assets, and using emergency measures to conceal an insolvency that is already baked into the cake. The only difference between then and now is the scale. In 2008, they were trying to hide the insolvency of a few banks. Today, they are trying to hide the insolvency of the Western currency system itself. And make no mistake, this was not a decision made in a vacuum by a few panicked executives at the Federal Reserve. An operation of this magnitude, one that risks exposing the entire fraudulent nature of the market, requires consensus at the highest levels of global power. The phone calls that were made on December 31st didn't just go from Wall Street to the Eccles building in Washington. The lines went hot to the U.S. Treasury, which has a vested interest in suppressing precious metals to maintain the illusion of dollar strength. The signals were sent to the Bank of England, the custodian of a vast amount of physical metal that has been leased and released into oblivion. And most critically, the plan had to be blessed by the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, the central bank of central banks, the shadowy institution that coordinates the actions of the global financial cartel. This was not a domestic bailout. This was a synchronized global counterattack by the architects of the paper system against the forces of physical reality. Why did they have to act with such violence and coordination? Because they saw what was coming. The surge in silver's price throughout 2025 wasn't just driven by retail investors. It was a calculated, strategic accumulation by powers hostile to the US dollar's global dominance. Sovereign wealth funds and central banks in the East have been systematically draining physical gold and silver from Western vaults for years, accelerating their purchases throughout the year. They are not buying paper contracts on the COMEX. They are demanding delivery of the real thing. This global run on physical metal was putting an unbearable strain on the fractional reserve paper scheme. The New Year's Eve attack wasn't just about saving one bank from its bad bets. It was a desperate strategic move in a new Cold War, a financial war, designed to punish anyone from individual citizens to rival nations who dared to challenge the paper dollar regime by seeking the safety of real money. Look at the brutal defensive measures they enacted immediately after the crime. Just hours after the price was slammed to $71, the COMEX, the very exchange where this fraud is perpetrated, announced it was jacking up margin requirements for silver futures contracts to an astronomical $25,000 per contract. Let me translate this for you. This is not a move you make in a healthy, functioning market. This is a weapon. It is a financial barrier designed with a single purpose: to force the liquidation of smaller players. They are deliberately making it prohibitively expensive for anyone but the largest cartel-aligned banks to hold a position betting on higher prices. It is a punitive measure designed to shake out and bankrupt the very people who are on the right side of the trade, ensuring that only the conspirators themselves are left standing when the dust settles. They are not trying to stabilize the market, they are trying to clear the battlefield of their enemies. Do you see the full picture now? The failing bank was the canary in the coal mine. Its impending collapse threatened to trigger a margin call cascade that would have exposed the entire paper derivatives complex as a hollow shell, devoid of the physical metal it claimed to represent. The emergency $31 billion liquidity injection from the Fed was the immediate life support. The coordinated takedown of the silver price was the act of fraud to get them through the regulatory snapshot, and the subsequent margin hikes were the cartel's way of locking the gates, ensuring that the rebellion against their paper system would be financially crushed. This is a multi-front war, and they have just revealed their entire strategy. They have shown the world that they will collude, they will print, and they will manipulate prices in broad daylight to protect their crumbling empire. You are now standing at the precipice of a stark, binary choice. The system you have been taught to trust your entire life is a sinking ship, and the captain and crew have already taken the lifeboats for themselves while broadcasting messages over the loudspeaker telling the passengers to remain calm and orderly. You can listen to them, clinging to your paper assets and digital account balances as the icy water rushes in, or you can take action. You can build your own raft. Their criminal act on New Year's Eve, their desperate and illegal suppression of the silver price, was an arrogant mistake that created one final microscopic window of opportunity. They have given you an unintentional gift, the chance to trade their rapidly depreciating paper currency for a real, tangible, timeless asset at a price that is a complete and utter fantasy. This is not about getting rich. This is about survival. It is about converting your savings from a form that they can print and devalue into a form that exists outside of their control, a form that has preserved wealth through every empire's collapse for 5,000 years. This is the cognitive climax. This is the moment you must act on what you now understand. The complexity of the situation has been deliberately engineered to induce paralysis, but the solution is brutally simple. To guide you through this, I have prepared an urgent, no-nonsense intelligence briefing titled The January Detonation: 3 Steps to Take Before the Price Escapes. This is not a theoretical document. It is a direct, actionable survival plan that outlines the exact steps you need to consider to insulate your wealth from the coming cascade. It details how to convert your vulnerable digital assets, your 401k, your savings, your brokerage accounts, into real physical assets that cannot be printed, hacked, or devalued by decree. This is not for everyone. It is not for the complacent or the skeptical. It is for the few who see the writing on the wall and have the courage to act decisively to protect themselves and their families from the inevitable. The window to use this information is closing with every tick of the clock. The link to this free briefing is directly below this video. Once you click it, you must act with purpose. Every hour you spend in deliberation is another hour the systemic elites are using to finalize the capital controls and lock down the system. They are betting on your fear, on your hesitation, on your lifelong conditioning to trust the authorities, prove them wrong. This is the great wealth transfer of our lifetime, and you must decide right now on which side of it you will be. The fraudulent price they have engineered is a mirage in the desert, and the entire world is about to realize there is no water. Download the briefing, absorb the information, execute the plan. The closet door is splintering and is about to be ripped from its hinges. This is your final chance. Protect yourself, now. You are now standing at the precipice of a stark binary choice. The system you have been taught to trust your entire life is a sinking ship, and the captain and crew have already taken the lifeboats for themselves while broadcasting messages over the loudspeaker telling the passengers to remain calm and orderly. You can listen to them clinging to your paper assets and digital account balances as the icy water rushes in, or you can take action. You can build your own raft. Their criminal act on New Year's Eve, their desperate and illegal suppression of the silver price, was an arrogant mistake that created one final microscopic window of opportunity. They have given you an unintentional gift, the chance to trade their rapidly depreciating paper currency for a real, tangible, timeless asset at a price that is a complete and utter fantasy. This is not about getting rich. This is about survival. It is about converting your savings from a form that they can print and devalue into a form that exists outside of their control, a form that has preserved wealth through every empire's collapse for 5,000 years. This is the cognitive climax. This is the moment you must act on what you now understand. The complexity of the situation has been deliberately engineered to induce paralysis, but the solution is brutally simple. To guide you through this, I have prepared an urgent, no-nonsense intelligence briefing titled The January Detonation. 3 steps to take before the price escapes. This is not a theoretical document. It is a direct, actionable survival plan that outlines the exact steps you need to consider to insulate your wealth from the coming cascade. It details how to convert your vulnerable digital assets, your 401k, your savings, your brokerage accounts, into real, physical assets that cannot be printed, hacked, or devalued by decree. This is not for everyone. It is not for the complacent or the skeptical. It is for the few who see the writing on the wall and have the courage to act decisively to protect themselves and their families from the inevitable. The window to use this information is closing with every tick of the clock. The link to this free briefing is directly below this video. Once you click it, you must act with purpose. Every hour you spend in deliberation is another hour the systemic elites are using to finalize the capital controls and lock down the system. They are betting on your fear, on your hesitation, on your lifelong conditioning to trust the authorities. Prove them wrong. This is the great wealth transfer of our lifetime, and you must decide right now on which side of it you will be. The fraudulent price they have engineered is a mirage in the desert, and the entire world is about to realize there is no water. Download the briefing, absorb the information, execute the plan. The closet door is splintering and is about to be ripped from its hinges. This is your final chance. Protect yourself, now.